Hi guys, here we go. This is part one of two for today, which is of course Friday, and for some reason I'm not getting anything in my phones. I hope that doesn't mean no, I've got audio levels. Actually, I'm slamming the audio levels. I'm being way loud. Well, I'm just going to roll with it. You know what? Cuz this is a short one anyway. Let's get to it. Pull this up. Slideshow from beginning. We're going to talk about signaling theory. I hate stuff with stupid puns in the title, but I just can't resist this one. Because it's perfect. The advent of fake news is nothing less and not much more than a giant shift in the signaling systems that we use to decide what stories to believe and which ones to discount as deception or satire or fiction. So, okay, here's the TLDR. The old systems don't work anymore, but lots of people are still using them. And lots of unscrupulous people are still using them to swindle people. Let's start with a story from a few years ago. Feels like a lot of years ago, but it wasn't. I don't know. I think I mentioned the story around week 3. But back in 2012, a woman calling herself Lisa Quinn logged onto Reddit and posted this picture and wrote, "Opinions, please, Reddit. Do you think my Uncle Joe was just weird or a serial killer?" She said she had found these old newspaper clippings, one of which is depicted here, in the bottom of a steamer trunk. And she had also found Uncle Joe's diary, which had sure made it sound like he'd murdered 4 women in New York City in the late 1890s. So Lisa made a blog about it, sharing her story, and now she was asking Redditors for help. Here's her blog. This is what it looked like. Redditors quickly discovered that all 4 of the victims were in fact real unsolved murder cases from the 1890s in New York. They also found that 4 of the murdered women had Wikipedia pages. All 4 of them did, actually. And one of those pages included speculation that maybe she'd been done in by Jack the Ripper himself. There was great excitement in Reddit for 24 minutes. Now, spoiler alert, right? You guys already know it turned out to be bullshit, but work with me here. What's suspicious about this story, what is suspicious about this story? As I've told it and shown it so far, that would lead you to suspect that it's maybe not legit. Don't know if you can see this very well, but those of you who have done extensive archive study involving old newspapers will hit on one thing right away. You will look at that and you'll go, that is fake as... It's very obviously copy paper stained with tea and burned on the edges. You can see the way it's wrinkled up. And no 1890s headline writer would ever use the word groping around, as in police groping around for a clue, or whatever that thing says. And, right, these are red flags, right? But what is a red flag at its heart? It's an unexplained inconsistency in a signal. I should explain. Signaling theory is a concept I'm borrowing from evolutionary biology. But it applies in spades in evolutionary bullshit, because bullshit evolves, right? That's why we look back on the primitive, the primitive, knuckle-dragging, cave-dwelling, Stephen Glass type of bullshit. From the standpoint of modern day, it's amazing because we have evolved. Okay, so in evolutionary biology, it manifests like this. The peacock with the largest tail is signaling to the peahens that he is the most viable mate. That signal is probably honest. He probably is the most viable mate because of evolutionary pressure. So as long as tail size correlates strongly with peacockly studliness and overall virility, the peahens can select the best one just by looking at the tail. Evolutionary pressure keeps the signal honest because it's in the species' best interest for the females to be able to easily pick the best mate. It is not, however, in the individual best interest of any given less studly male peacock. Every less studly male peacock wishes he had a bigger tail, or would if he weren't a stupid bird. But you see, he wants the big tail so he can impress the ladies with his tail. He doesn't care whether the big tail is an index of his awesome, which is in fact wanting, he doesn't care about that, right? He just wants a big tail so he can get the girls. Now, let's say a freak peacock is born who can control tail size independent of general studliness. As the stereotypical Jewish grandmother would say, how nice for him. But if his offspring inherit that ability, the tail size signal would go from being an honest signal to a dishonest signal. Tail-controlling peacocks would enjoy a brief period of time during which the good times would roll, but eventually the hens would figure out what's what and start picking mates in a different way. Or they might start figuring out that fake tails have a certain look to them and use that as a red flag, an inconsistency in the signal, to make a closer inspection before making a mating decision. Or they might just die out, right? These are birds. They're not creative thinkers. But you see what I mean. And speaking of intellectually challenged birds, I have another example for you. This is Nigel, or rather it was. He died off early this year. No, wait, that was last year. Anyway, Nigel is the one who's looking off to one side, and the other two that are looking straight up, those are made of cement. They are decoys. Now, you may have heard this story. It got a lot of press. New Zealand's government wanted to reestablish a gannet bird colony on a small island, so they put in a bunch of these cement decoy gannet birds trying to lure some birds in, and only one showed up. That was Nigel. He arrived in 2015 and promptly fell in love, apparently, with one of the cement decoys. He built it a nest. He spent hours grooming its non-existent fake feathers, and he died beside it 3 years later. I'm sorry. It's very sad. But we can't anthropomorphize Nigel too much. But it really is sad to think of the poor blighter pining away after this statuesque beauty, see what I did there, waiting for her to wake up. And it's hard not to wonder just a little bit if he ever suspected the truth. Did he ever allow himself to doubt? Maybe not, right? If you've spent 2 years or so waiting for Sleeping Beauty to wake up, which is literally a third of your life if you're a gannet bird, you're kind of invested in that narrative. This, of course, is the sunk cost fallacy, heavily spiced with confirmation bias. You want to believe, you need to believe, and so you wait for her to wake up. And then one day you die, and a lot of strangers on the other side of the world read about you in the Washington Post and feel very sorry for you. Nigel fell for a dishonest signal that he thought was 100% reliably honest. Yellow feathers, beak, long neck, and a soundtrack of bird calls being played on outdoor speakers. That's the recipe. Yeah. So, like the fake gannet birds, this Alice Walsh clipping here wants you to think that it's a 100% honest signal. According to signaling theory, what are the signals that are being presented here to make you think it's a true story? The style of presentation, it looks like an old newspaper. The weathering, which makes it look old. The complicatedness and plausibility of the story, right? Found in an old steamer trunk. Now here's the key insight. Before those concrete gannet bird decoys came along, a group of gannet birds looking at the sky and squawking was a 100% honest, reliable signal that a colony of gannet birds was on that island. Nigel could depend on that signal. He could make life-changing decisions on its basis without worrying about being led astray. When the concrete birds were deployed, that signal changed to dishonest, but Nigel didn't know that. So he spent his life, the rest of his life, ended it pining for love at the feet of a cement statue. Before desktop publishing technology reached a certain point, around 1995 or so, an artifact like this was a 100% reliably honest signal that you were looking at a story that had actually been printed in an actual, real, live, bona fide, 100% grade A artisan handcrafted newspaper. End of argument. It was an honest signal because you could not fabricate it. Well, now you can, right? So we are like the peahens who are starting to realize that some peacocks can control their tail size. The question is, what are we going to do about it? And I should also mention, too, we are like the peahens that have figured out that the peacocks can control their tails, but our parents haven't figured that out yet. And they're wondering what the hell we're doing, not jumping on that peacock that's got the huge tail because they think it's super studly, and we realize that it's dishonest. I'm sort of like, yeah, anyway. You get the idea. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to discard all truth claims regardless of the quality of their signaling? If we do that, there are some advantages. If all truth claims are created equal, we get to pick the ones we like best. So reality, or rather our perception of it, becomes a popularity contest, or maybe a reflection of the exercise of power. This is the outcome that you will most often hear people who are very worried about the change in communication strategy among the very politically powerful right now, especially the president and his not cabinet, but his staff are indulging in right now. I would argue that it's overblown. That isn't the way it usually works, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Which of these photographs shows the true size of the Inauguration Day crowds? Whichever one you want, right? Because the crowds are gone now, so who's to say? These are all the alternative facts, right? Depending on which one of the two narratives you want to believe, you can select either one of these as your chosen peacock tail. If you select the one on the left, you align yourself with the desires of those in power right now. If you select the one on the right, you align yourself against those desires. Which narrative is true? Well, you can't tell anymore by looking at the tail. You're going to have to go outside of the tail to figure out how studly that peacock really is, at least before it's everlastingly too late. The peacock's tail no longer correlates to the studliness of the peacock. The professional appearance of the website no longer correlates to the reliability of the news. The quality of the photograph and the professionality of the composing and whatnot no longer correlates to the truthfulness of the photograph. So we either get to pick, or you have to start inspecting the tails much more closely than you used to have to, which is a pain in the butt. But the stakes are pretty high. I mean, they were pretty high for poor Nigel. Inability to tell honest from dishonest signaling ruined his whole life. This is like the saddest picture. This is like freaking Sarah McLachlan class sad shit right here. Poor Nigel. The stakes are pretty high for us, too. And a lot of people have not yet realized something that's really critical to understand, something that, frankly, millennials are a hell of a lot better about figuring out than people my age seem to be. Present company accepted, of course, that digital production tools have ruined all the honest signals. They have ruined all of the tails. All the peacocks can have whatever tail they want now. There are no signals that you can know with 100% certainty are honest. There is no peacock whose tail can be depended on to consistently and constantly and always reflect his studliness like there was 50 or 60 years ago, or 20 or 30 years ago. But that doesn't mean those signals are useless. No. It just means you have to look closely at the feathers and cross-reference other signs of peacock studliness before you give your heart to the one with the most beautiful plumage. How do you do that? Well, here's the key. And the thing to remember is that the key to telling honest from dishonest signaling in media content, you know it's coming. Yes, the prime directive. You know this, right? The story of Alice Walsh. Let's take the story of Alice Walsh and check that peacock. What's the evidence here? Some rando with a stock format WordPress blog and some pictures. The pictures look good from far away, but you don't get high-res views of them. They're sized for that page, and that is all you get. And they're all from the same source, this WordPress blogger. There are also Wikipedia entries for the 4 murder victims, and that sounds like independent corroboration, right? Well, maybe not. Within 1 hour, someone had posted this comment, which reads, I'm going to read it to you just in case you can't see the screen well enough. I know I'm probably being cynical, but does this seem like viral marketing to anyone? The fact that Alice Walsh Wikipedia article was created 2 weeks ago, and the way the articles in the picture look, it's like they're falsely aged. That's the T, by the way. Edit. May not be viral marketing, just someone trolling, but the inclusion of 2 recently made Wikipedia articles made me feel like this was supposed to be bigger. Reference to a movie or something. And the first one comes down here and says, damn, original poster went through all that trouble to fool us and gets called out in only 26 minutes. Reddit, you are a cruel mistress. Yeah. Within an hour, like literally 26 minutes, the other Redditors were like, oh yeah, that's kind of a red flag. Let's look a little more closely. And they started looking a little bit more closely, and it just started to unravel from there. The Wikipedia articles had been posted and edited by a tiny group of very new users. That would be the classroom, right? The Wikipedia, yeah, the finding documents in an old steamer trunk, that seems suspiciously on the nose, as the screenwriters say. Like something you would see in a spec script from a high school kid who was hoping to break into Hollywood. And why had Lisa been savvy enough to ask Reddit when, but not savvy enough to like Google the names and find the Wikipedia pages? Just like that, the work of months lay in ruins. It took less than an hour. And it turned out that the whole thing had been put together by a class of undergraduates at George Mason University. Their rascally professor had created a class called Lying About the Past, for what reason I know not, and the whole thing was someone's term project. And before anybody asks, no, it wasn't me. But let me finish this lecturette by circling back to the imaginary peacock. Again, the one who's figured out how to control his tail. Although peacocks are especially stupid birds, I bet that within a couple of generations, the signaling value of tail size would be completely gone. With humans, the process of a compromised signal losing its value is much faster. 20 years ago, only a few people had the technical wizardry skill to Photoshop a photograph. Today, anybody can do that. Most people do. If someone shows you a photograph of Hillary Clinton robbing a bank, you would instantly distrust the signal. Your grandfather might not. If 30 years ago, if someone showed you a photograph of Ronald Reagan robbing a bank, you'd probably believe it. You see the same dynamic at work in home construction, actually. You see it there a lot. Pergo floating laminate flooring is basically a photographic image of an expensive hardwood floor printed on big slabs of thin material that you snap together. And when it first came out, it was super popular. It was $1,000 a room floor that looked like $15,000 a room exotic hardwood. People installed it, and for a little while they felt like players. But then what happened? The appearance of that floor had formerly been a reliable signal that you had spent 15 grand on the floor of your living room. Now, it was an unreliable signal of that. So people start looking for other signals. The way the light shines on the surface, for instance. The lack of cracks between every board. Or the way it sounds when you walk on it. Pock, 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 pock. Within a few years, Pergo no longer sent the $15,000 signal. It sent the $1,000 signal plus a new signal, which was... the people who installed this wanted you to think they paid 15 grand for it. So there's that. Same thing here. 20 years ago, this would have worked great. 20 years ago, I would have sucked this right up. But, I mean, people would have been like, well, that doesn't look like the old newspapers I've seen, but it looks old, so it must be legit. And nobody knows how to do that except for people who work at newspapers, so it must be legit. Today, anyone who's seen old newspapers will instantly recognize it and probably even dope out how it was done using the uneven staining patterns. Signals degrade when they stop being reliable, sometimes with blinding speed, sometimes not. Life is actually bullshit resistant, so take heart. And also, if you have the opportunity to buy a cheap thing that looks like an expensive thing, this is a great dynamic to keep in mind. Because, yeah, it happens. That stuff degrades. This is probably before your time, but there was a time when vinyl siding was the shit. I mean, people were like, oh, I'm going to tear off all of this cedar siding on my house and replace it with vinyl. It looks like cedar, but I don't have to do anything other than hose it down once a year. Now you can see vinyl siding on a house from a mile away, and it just looks cheap. it didn't look cheap when they installed it. It looked like, super expensive upscale siding. Yeah. That's it for this talk. It looks like we're just about at 20 minutes, which is perfect. The next one that I've got for you will be about another 20 minutes, and then we'll be off to seize the weekend. Thanks for watching. Okay, let's see if I can turn all this stuff off. Click. Okay, stop recording. Bye.